You know, one of our prayer requests that should be for rain is one pastor friend of mine posted it, so I made a copy of it. This is a prayer that was written in the 1950s during an awful drought in Texas. If you don't remember, people act like we've never had this stuff before. No, I can tell you in the 50s and 60s, when we were digging post holes by hand, you had to pour water in the hole sometimes where you could dig it out. And I don't remember hardly ever practice or a game or anything for rain during that period, you know, when they're growing up. So anyway, but it was always hot, and we didn't have air conditioning back then. So, you know, and I don't, you know, so anyway, but this was a prayer for rain that was written back then by Father W. Schneider of St. Mary's in Fredericksburg. Y'all know where Fredericksburg is. Who also ministered at St. Francis Church in Stonewall. He said, Almighty God, we are in need of rain. We realize now, looking up into the clear blue sky above, what a marvel even the least drop of rain really is. To think that so much water can fall out of the sky, which now is empty and clear. We place our trust in you. We are sure that you know our needs, but you want us to ask you anyway, to show you that we know we are dependent on you. Look on our dry hills and fields, dear God, and bless them with the living blessing of a soft rain. Then the land will rejoice, the rivers will sing your praises, and the hearts of men will be glad. Amen. I thought that was a pretty good little prayer. That'd be a good one for us to kind of keep in mind here until we get some more rain. I have a couple of prayer requests. Like I said, this is my first day to drive, so we'll see how that goes. But and then I got a friend of mine that I mentioned before. He and I grew up together. Like brothers. I actually met with him 1 year in high school. Anyway, he's got a little better report. He has cancer, multiple forms and everything, but he's gotten some better reports, so I'm grateful for that. And then another friend of mine's daughter-in-law is doing a little better, so I got praise is what I'm saying. I have another friend of mine whose wife is in the hospital down here in the Woodlands, and he's got fever and stuff and can't even stay with her right now, so, you know, just pray for them. So I'm just saying, everybody's got stuff. Just know that. So just pray for me as I go through this pacemaker stuff. I'm trying to get used to it. My wife told me and made me promise her I would not flail with my left arm. She said I flail when I talk. So I'm going to try to keep this immobile. Okay? So it's not numb. It's just I'm trying to behave myself, which is very difficult. So anyway. All right. Who else has a praise? Yes, ma'am.
All his tests come back negative. She went to the doctor today, and she's got to go back in 6 months to have another doctor. But as far as right now, everything's good.
Good.
Amen.
That's always good.
Yeah, it is.
And anytime you get it, you be grateful for it. You know what that meant. Who else has one?
I do. I want to say that I came back feeling like a brand new person when we came back from our ladies retreat. And I praise the Lord for the gathering and all of us getting to fellowship with each other, and Sister Pennington and our youngin' over there being the presenters and bringing forth such rich treasures for us to bring back with us to remember for a long time.
Absolutely. I asked Lindsay a while ago if she was still on her high. Usually when y'all go off on retreats or kids go to camp or whatever, it takes you a couple of weeks to get back down, which is good. You know, that you got that. The sad part is you can't keep it. That's the hard part. But everybody, I remember one time years ago, I was packed up in North Texas, and we had a retreat thing that people just come back from, and they, you know, I don't know how y'all do it, but we used to have people have a chance to share testimonies and stuff, and they were talking about how great it was, One of the fathers in the background back was, what do we have to do to keep them? And I said, you can't. That's the problem. Jesus taught us that. You can't stay on the mountaintop. That's the problem. Where our job is to live down here. We need those once in a while. But you're not supposed to live there. And that's what, you know, the three that Jesus took up on Transfiguration didn't get. Remember, they were trying to set up permanent dwellings up there. And Jesus said, no, we got to go back down. So that's always been the hard part for that. We get to permanently dwell when we get into the Revelation. Okay? But until then, we don't get to permanently dwell. We have to live with that. Too, you know, that's the other one there. So, anyway. Who else has a praise?
Is Everything okay with your wife? She's not here tonight.
Oh, yeah, my, middle daughter's coming in with her family this evening, and she had to be there for them. And my oldest daughter came in, she's going with her daughter that lives with us, and they're going home, so Judy had to stay there for them this evening, so, yeah, so that's it. She's nothing wrong with her, except she's glad to get rid of me for a few minutes. But anyway, yeah. Who else? Anybody else? Okay. Let me, pray and we'll get started. Everybody get the handouts that you need? Everybody, y'all get caught up?
Oh, can I ask, y'all remember my dad with his heart stuff?
Exactly what is his, I mean, I know.
He has a leaking aortic valve.
Okay. And he told me you're gonna have surgery this fall?
Yes, his surgery will be in the fall to replace that, and it's really affecting, I think, his energy. He thinks that's, you know, by the time he gets to the evening, he's in his words, out of gas. So that's what he told me tonight, and he wanted to make sure everybody realized he would like to be here.
Oh, I know.
And then also his,
heart stuff.
yes,
So, yeah.
also his blood sugar, you know, it's gotten low a couple days in a row, so that's always a concern too. So.
You've got to learn to deal with that.
Yes.
It's very hard when you're not used to it.
Yes.
So that's just like, I got to learn to deal with this stuff. You know.
And you won't slow down either. I noticed that day before yesterday on that.
Well, they told us it'd just take them a couple of weeks to recover from that open heart surgery.
So y'all pray for us too.
I know, that's what my wife had to go through, my family, but when I went through all my stuff, so that's what I'm saying. I can speak personally to all that stuff.
I can too.
Yeah. As a general statement, I'm gonna put this in qualitative terms for us. All good men struggle with that. That's why we have good wives, you know. So anyway, but yeah, she's doing this stuff. That's why she told me the other day, she said, yeah, don't make a habit of this. You know, she's doing all this stuff. Anyway, all right, let's pray. Father, thank you, Lord, for loving us and being there for us. Lord, you're the one that gives us what we need. We don't always know what that is or when we need it or how much or how to get it. And Lord, you're the one that determines that. We're grateful. It's not up to us. We thank you for the praises. We do thank you for the retreat. Those things, those mountaintops, those times away are always special. You know what that was. You got away from time to time yourself, Lord. But we also know that's not where we can live. So help us to learn how to take what we've got and use it and pass it on and get us through this life and the valleys in which we live. Thank you for being here tonight. Help us as we continue to look at your word that you gave us about how it's all coming together and your plan is going to be played out. Help us understand it better and then be able to share it with others around us. In Jesus' name. Amen. By the way, I had another pastor that I met here a while back, and I gave him one of his outlines. He's been calling me now. He's working through this stuff himself, and I've been sending him stuff. So it's good. It makes sense to me, and that's what I wanted to do. I'm going to quickly go over Revelation 12, 1 to 13, 10, the Church of Divine Provision. We've already covered that, but I want to make sure that you get it. If you look at that handout I just made, the reason I made it is I want you to keep in mind, remember what we're doing. We're looking at this from the big picture down. We're looking at it from the International Space Station, is one way to put it. When you look at the Earth, you see things differently. And so I put this little handout together so you see how the pieces fit together in the last part of Revelation here. I brought up again the four stages of history. Remember, everything goes back to these basics. You have creation in Genesis 1 and 2, the fall in Genesis 3, 1 through 13, and then the redemption process goes all the way from 3:14 to Revelation 20:15, and then you have the restoration in Genesis 21 and 22. Everything fits within that. Always go back to that. Don't lose your place, because the pastor I was talking about just a little while ago, that he's working through all this stuff. Have people, well, well, what they do is they pull stuff out of context, which I try to get across to you. You can't do, not legit. And then they want to make it fit, and they want to redefine it. That's the other thing, People want to define. That's what's going on in culture right now. Everybody wants to redefine everything. What is a woman? What is a man? What is marriage? What is a family? What is a church? All these things. And it's not good. That's why we're in this mess. Only the Creator knows the design. If you vary from that, you're in trouble. I don't care what it is, whether it's a computer, or a car, or a truck. a house, if you don't follow the design, then it doesn't work right. You know, I've mentioned that to you before, that word pathology. You know, it's something that doesn't function the way it's designed. And every one of us has pathologies, and we live in the midst of a world filled with pathologies. That's why we shouldn't. Jesus said, in this world you're going to have what? Tribulation. Another way of saying pathology. And so I don't understand why people are shocked and surprised when things don't go right. I'm shocked and surprised when they do, you know, to be honest with you. You know, I'm grateful when they do. And I work toward those things. But I'm also not surprised if they don't work. So that's what I want you to keep in mind. So as we look at this, I want you to see how I put this down here. And what we're seeing here in 11:15 through 20:15, and I just summarized that for you, is that transition. This is the overview of you know what the great battle that we're in. You know, the reason I put these 4 stages in is you and I were not there at creation. God was, you know, the Trinity, but not us, and then Adam and Eve. We were not there at the fall, but we are in redemption. We're in that whole process, because everyone since then, starting with Adam and Eve, have been in that process. And you should always remember that. And God's process is to redeem or buy back what was lost. Always keep that in your mind. Everything that happens is God going through this process to redeem or bring back or restore what He lost. Okay, what we lost in that fall issue. And so Revelation here is trying to show us the battle that's going on to let us be able to restore what was lost. In other words, simply because God said, all right, now I'm going to restore everything, which is His promise there in Revelation 3. Genesis 3. But it has not been easy. I like to get people to think about Job. The reason the first 2 chapters of Job starts off by showing you what's going on up above. Job never knows any of this stuff, right? All he knows is his whole world comes collapsing around. And that's why Job's in the book, in the Bible. Because that's our world. Redemptive process is a war. And it's going on 2 levels. There is a, divine, spiritual level, then there's a human level. And that's what's being described here from both these angles, say. And you've got to keep that in mind as you look at that. And what you're dealing with here in Revelation 12 is the process, the cost, and the participants. It lays out for you who's involved in this war, this battle. You don't have to guess. There's none of this. You don't have to hire Perry Mason to figure out who's guilty. My wife loves to watch Perry Mason in the evening. After we eat, he comes on. After we watch the news, Wheel of Fortune. Then she kicks on Perry Mason, lays on the couch, and she goes out. That's her. She's got a standing date with Perry. He has back-to-back episodes, so she gets about 2 hours sleep every evening before she goes to bed. And she's always been that way. She can't sleep right if she don't get a nap first. Okay. So anyway, but you don't have to hire Perry. Have you ever noticed how Perry figures it out? They all confess. When I worked on the police department, nobody wanted to confess when you had them dead to rights. And then I watch these British mysteries, and they do the same thing. They brainly figured out. My granddaughter and Judy and I were watching Death on the Nile, Agatha Christie thing, and then they all confess at the end. Did you know anybody that confessed when you got them red-handed, or they go, "It's not me, it's not me"? How many times do you see them? Well, that's not who I really am. Well, yeah, it is. So anyway, but you don't have to guess who the participants are in this. It nails them down for you very clearly, okay? And it starts out in chapter 12, verse 1. And a great sign appeared where?
Heaven.
Heaven. Realize that. It's showing you both angles, just like Job does. What's going on up here in the spiritual realm that you and I do not normally see, and then what it looks like down below. That's what's being portrayed for us, okay? And so it says, first of all, a great sign appeared in heaven, and what was it?
A woman.
A woman. Okay, now it goes on to describe this woman, and when you listen to this description, you can understand who the woman is. Who is the woman? It's the people of God. Okay? Someone argues it's only the Israelites, the Jews in the past. Well, if you want to argue that, that's fine. But the bottom line is the people of God. Okay? And that's why it's clothed with sun, with the moon under her feet, and her head a crown of 12 stars. Why 12 stars?
12 tribes.
12 tribes, there you go. And you know, that kind of stuff. Later in Revelation, you see those 12 show up in the new heavenly earth all the time. All that stuff. So anyway, and she was pregnant, was crying out in birth pains and the agony. And some trying to say, well, it's Mary. No, Mary was representative of all of them, and she had the privilege of doing it, but it came from the line and through. That's why their lines had to be that way. So the Messiah comes out of that was the covenant promise, wasn't it? All the way back to the fall there in Genesis was, I am going to give a seed, you know, and it's interesting because the word that he uses there in Genesis is seed singular, not plural. In fact, it's so important that Paul in Galatians, if you've never studied it, argues that's why Jesus was Messiah, because it was seed singular, because here's what the Jews have done in the past and continue to do today. They see their nation as that seed, plural. And Paul says, it's in the singular, and you guys know it, you know, and that's why Jesus is the Messiah, not the nation of Israel. That's what they do, by the way, when you say, well, how can they not know in Isaiah 53, when it talks about the suffering servant? Because they interpret it as being them as a group. Okay? So just remember that. That's how they do that. And that's why they don't forget it, you know, when you talk about it. But Paul thinks that it's so important when you Galatians. That's his whole argument, based on that one section there. A singular verb for seed. A seed of the woman. And here, this is picking up on that, right? And saying, and she, and the agony of giving birth. And so, out of the nation comes this one seed. And then another sign appeared out of heaven. What's this one? Verse 3.
Dragon.
Red dragon. Now, again, you know, you can't tell the players without a program. But this program's pretty clear, okay? And it tells you that. With 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, I've mentioned to you and I gave you handouts about the importance of numbers, symbolism. So this is someone who has a great deal of power, right? That's what it's talking about. It's not some ugly creature that has all these growths coming out of its head. It's a symbolic picture of Satan, because Satan, we know, is what? Paul says it. He's an angel of
Light.
light. You know, that's where they get it wrong. All these things. That's the Middle Ages idea of a red suit and horns and pitchfork and all that. And when Satan appeared to Jesus in the wilderness, he didn't come with red suit and pitchfork. You know, he didn't. So, you know, you've got a giant red dragon, a great red dragon, 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. What are diadems? Crowns. Yeah, we got old hymns on, you know. Remember about the diadems? Yeah, that's crowns. So in other words, this is somebody who has great power and rules. Who wears crowns? Rulers, right? And so that's all it's doing. It's giving you a description here. And his tail swept a third of the stars out of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, she might devour it. So, and it is setting it, what you're seeing portrayed here, it's what you and I call the Christmas story and went on beyond, right? Mary gets this thing, she's going to have the child, and who does the dragon work through trying to destroy it?
Herod.
You see, that's what this is. It's a you know a metaphorical description of a historical fact, right? And it's true both divine and humanly. You see, historically, in other words, you know, in our history. So that's what it is. It's just portraying for us. And so you have the woman and the great red dragon, and then you have what after that, 5 and 6. What's the next part? Character of the person here.
Child.
Male child. A male child, singular, not children. A child. Well, who is that? That's that seed. It goes all the way back to Genesis 3, the promise that a seed that Paul argues is the whole argument for Jesus, you know, and all this. So it's just simply saying, who she give birth to? The Messiah. I mean, what's the promise been all along? God's going to send a child. Remember what the word Messiah means. By the way, the word Christ is the Greek form of Messiah. People often get confused. They think Jesus Christ is his first and last name. No, it means Jesus, the Messiah, is what it means, okay? He was known, his name in the everyday thing, and it's mentioned in the Gospels as what? He was known as Jesus what? Or Joseph, or Ben Joseph, son of Joseph. That was his human name. You say, that's how they were known back then, as the son of. And so his name in everyday life was Jesus, Bar Joseph, and the reason I say Bar or Ben, Hebrew is the word for son. Bar, just like if you're from Scotland or Ireland or the Celtic background, you got a name like Mac Dougal or Mac so and so. What's the Mac? It's an ancient word that means son of. That's where the line you're out of. That's how they figure that out. So it's the same thing. In other words, cultures have always had this way. And so Jesus' everyday name, if you know, notice they'll talk about, wasn't this the son of Joseph? That's how they identify. Okay? So here we have a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Promises come out all the way in the Old Testament, the book of Psalm. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Well, who's the only one that's had that happen? Yeah, you follow? You see it? It's not hard. Just follow along. And the woman fled into the wilderness. Now again, where she was had a place prepared by God in which she has been nourished for 12 hours. See, that's an incomplete period of time. I'm trying to tell you that it tells you weeks, days, months, but every one of those is the same period of time in different ways of describing it. And it's a way of using the metaphor how God was with his people in the Old Testament. Where, when God brought, by the way, in the Old Testament, if you don't know, Israel is called God's son. Look it up. Okay? And where did God's son go after he was brought out? Went into the wilderness. Where did God's people go? Into the wilderness. Follow? So this is using that Exodus because this is the fulfillment of what God had promised and gave them. You know, everything in the Old Testament, as the writer of Hebrews talks about, is a setup for the fulfillment that comes through Jesus Christ. Right? Passover was a setup. He's the Passover lamb. The high priest. Who's the high priest for us? Jesus Christ. You read Hebrews, you got to read it that way. That's why people don't get Hebrews. It's metaphorical fulfillment of everything promised in the Old Testament. That's what Revelation is doing here. You know, this is the story here. And now he says in verse 7, after all this happens, and God's people are in the wilderness. So where are you and I today? Don't die on me here. Where are we at? Just said it.
The wilderness?
Thank you. Don't get confused. I'm not tricking you, okay? I'm trying to keep you focused. Because what we do is we want to jump all over the place. We're in the wilderness because we're God's people, right? Now, Jesus is where? He's right hand of the Father now. But we're in the wilderness. Now, God's with us, like he was with his people in the Old Testament, the Exodus account. You follow? That's what it's trying to get across to us here. And it says now in verse 7, now war arose where?
In heaven.
All right, so now it's shifted this up. And if you follow my little outline thing I gave you here, it talks about just like, how did Job start? What was going on in heaven? How does this section start? What's going on? You and I can't physically see it, but he's going to tell you how it plays out in our world. But behind the scene, what's happening? There is a divine spiritual war going on. And it tells you who's fighting. Okay? So that, in other words, now, some of you are old enough. Mr. Hardy, you probably old enough to remember World War II. We had a two-front war. The Japanese and the Germans. That's what this is about. There's a two-front war going on here. Okay? One is there, one's down here. Okay? I'm just trying to get y'all to understand what's being portrayed here. It's giving us both. It's the same war. It's World War II. In those cases, it's the divine war for redemption. Because you don't give up easy. You know, he's not going to give up his slaves. He don't want to give us up. So he's fighting. So now war rose to heaven. And Michael, so there's the next one. Who's Michael? That's the archangel. He's the one who didn't fall, didn't go away, who stayed true, and his angels, fighting against what? The dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. So there is a spiritual war up there, and then there's one down here, right? Now, God's going to take care of both of them, but he doesn't different ways. And up there, it's through Michael and his archangels, and ultimately they win. You know, I like the old evangelists always said, I've read the end of the book, we win. You know, yeah, well, this is it right here, okay? The end of the book. And then, and it says what happened. But he was defeated. Yeah, we know that. Satan fell against God. And by the way, remind you again, if you read the Old Testament, where are those kind of things found? What was the reason why Satan, who was one of the apparently archangels early on, very powerful individual, still is, by the way. That's why he has all those horns and all that stuff. You can't whip him. If you try to take on Satan one-on-one, you're going to lose. The only one who successfully ever headed him down one-on-one was Jesus. Okay? The rest of us need some help. Okay? But it talks about here what caused him to fall. Have you ever read some of those passages in Ezekiel and Isaiah? There's a couple passages. Now, it also it's one of those messianic passages, so it has a dual meaning. There was a king in that day and time, but there's also a divine thing behind it. What was the one thing that caused Satan and his angels to fall? One word.
Pride.
Starts with a P.
Pride.
Yes. Why have I told you I stopped using the word? Now, I don't use it. When I tell people I'm not going to tell them I'm proud of them. Because pride, the Bible says, is what?
Destructive.
The root of all sin. So why do you want to tell someone I'm proud of you? Now again, I'm not going to fight you over it or make fun of you or whatever. But think about that. Because you think what our culture pushes all the time. I'm so proud of who I am and what I do and da-da-da-da-da. I'm proud to be homosexual. I'm proud to be, a drug addict. I'm proud to be whatever it is. It always leads to destruction. It's the pride is the base of all sin. It's what caused Satan to fall. He wanted to be equal or to take God's place. So why do you want to promote that? So anytime you promote pride as your basis for something, you're promoting Satan and his whole agenda. So why do we do that? And we're all guilty of that. I mean, it's something you need to work through. I'm not saying, that you don't excommunicate. That's not it. It's just there's a lot of terms and things we use and we don't think about what we're really saying. Because it's what's said. And I know what people mean when they said, I'm proud of my son, I'm proud of my daughter, I'm proud of my, da-da-da-da. They don't really mean it in those terms. But is that not really what you're saying? They are what matters to me most. Is that not a sin? I mean, you hear me say it all the time. My wife is not number one to me. God is. She's number two, but she can handle that because she has no rivals. Follow what I'm saying? That's where you come. Same thing with your children. My girls, and I love them as much as you can do, but they're not number one. And people get messed up with that. They let something else and anything that takes the place of God in your life is sin and wrong. And it can be your spouse, it can be yourself, it can be your children, your grandchildren. Be careful now, that it can be your job, it can be anything you can think of. It can be not just someone, but something. So that's what I'm always pushing you back to these basics. So here, you have this battle going on, and he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And verse 9, and the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient, it's identified, so you don't have to wonder who this is. Well, who's it talking about? The ancient serpent, well, what's that a reference to? Genesis 3, what happened in the garden of fall, right? Who is called what? The devil and Satan. He's called both. And both of them have similar but different names, In the Old Testament, he's Hasatan. That's the Hebrew word, and then and Diablos is the Greek form of that, in the New Testament. But anyway, and he's the deceiver of the whole world. Why? He's pushing people to go a direction they shouldn't go against God. Now, Mr. Ball back there and I are working through Romans right now. And in chapter 1, Paul gets very specific about what's wrong in our world. Doesn't he? In chapter 1, y'all remember? It's all about what? We're going the wrong direction. And God just lets you go because he won't violate your free will. And you see, that's what we got going. Well, who pushes that whole deception? And that's what Paul's talking about in Romans. They're terrible because they exchange the truth of God for a lie. They're constantly chasing after these false things. Our whole culture, our whole world is chasing after false things. If they're not careful, we chase after false things. And that's the battle. Okay? And he was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And, You don't think he came down and go, oh, well, I guess I'm going to retirement now. No. Now the battle, but you're going to see how he battles us. See, he lost there. Now he's battled us down here. And he tells us how he does that, okay? And it says, therefore, he says, and I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. In other words, how do we conquer this dude? You don't do it. How do we do it? He tells you right there. Yeah, the blood of the Lamb, the word of the testimony, and when you're not willing to love your lives above even to death. In other words, you're going to be faithful unto death. Is that you? Supposed to be. Then why do we have so many people who claim to be Christians walking away today? Oh, I'm not in God anymore. Some of them are theologians, ministers, pastors, music leaders, all these different people. What is that? Well, that means there's something wrong here somewhere, But you and I don't do it. That's the other thing. I know there are books out and there are seminars and groups who want to teach you how to be spiritual warriors. Be careful about that. Now, Paul warns us we need to do it by prayer, very important. But there are groups and organizations and seminars and books that try to tell you how to do it. You can't do it. It's only by him through. Okay? There's 12. Therefore, since we know that answer, what's he tell us to do?
Rejoice.
Rejoice. What did Paul tell us in Philippians that he had learned to do? His whole book is geared around the idea of what? Rejoicing. We should rejoice even though we're in a dysfunctional, pathological world. Why? Because we win. If we hang in there. These people walking away and turning their backs don't win. You can't win. It's just like you say you're on I'm just making this up as an analogy. Say you're on a sports team. Say you're on the New Waverly football team, and they're about to go to state. You get ready to play the game, and someone says, "Nah, we're not playing." They walk out. They don't win, even if the Bulldogs win. You know what I'm saying? Well, that's what this is too. Okay. So anyway, it's strange. Therefore, it says, "Rejoice, O heavens, you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea." Now notice this. He says, "Earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is what?
Short.
He's on a leash." That's why, for example, in Job, it starts off and tells you what? He wasn't allowed to do anything but what God allowed him to do. Never think Satan runs and does his own show. He only allowed to do what God allows him to do. He's on a leash. But he is on a leash. There's a reason for his leash. Okay, that's his role. And because we have to be proven. One of those words I learned years ago, you'll see it over and over again in the Greek language. It says your faith has to be documented. Okay? And you'll see it translated different ways into English. Paul talks about it in some of his letters and other ways. Your faith has to be documented. Your faith cannot be documented unless you're what? Tested. Why was there something in the garden that they had to make a decision of? They had to be tested. The only way you can ever be anything is to be tested. That's why teachers have to give tests and students hate it. But the only way you can know where somebody's at is what? To test them. And they say, well, that's not really who I am. Well, you made a 6, dude. That's who you were today in that test. Maybe you ought to study a little more. You just, that type of thing. So, but that's what we do in life, isn't it? I don't want to be tested. How are you ever going to grow and build up and become what you're supposed to be? Growing up, I learned not when things went the way I wanted, but when I had to face stuff and learn and grow and stuff. Okay? And then it says, and when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, notice that he didn't willingly go. He was thrown down. Well, who threw him down there? God did. Okay? And he pursued the woman. Who's the woman?
God's people.
God's people. Who have been given birth to the male child. Okay? But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle. Why does he yank that reference there? That she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness. Why is that reference given 2 wings of the great eagle? Because if you go back to Exodus chapter 19 and 20, where God has his people come out and he brings them there and he gives them the 10 commandments and all that, starts to address them as his people and turns them into his name. God says to them, I brought you on eagle's wings. How did they get out of Egypt? That's a reference to God doing. Okay? You follow? Just go back and look chapter 19 when they asked, he says, I brought you on eagle's wings. So that's a reference to the fact. Remember, this is a reference to the Exodus. Only now it's our Exodus, not just the Old Testament Exodus. It's the divine Exodus, not just the human one that set the stage for all this. But she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and a half. Now again, there's another way of saying the same thing those others said. Okay, in other words, for a period of time. That's what it's talking about. Israel was taking care of manna, quail, water out of a rock. Who took care of them? God did. What was he doing? He was teaching them. Where does all of our stuff come from? Him. Why do we keep thinking somehow we have something to do with it? The Old Testament struggled with it, people. We do today. I mean, I've had people literally tell me, well, I made this. No, you didn't. You didn't make diddly squat. You were given the opportunity, and God used you in that opportunity. And everything you have is because God lets you have it. Work for you to get it. Now, what's he want you to do is keep it for yourself? I've had people say, well, this is wrong. No, it's not. Or if they're really legalistic, they'll tell you about the tithe. I give my 10%. That's God's and the rest is mine. That's garbage. It's all his. You give that, and by the way, tithing is a starting point. It's just a rule of thumb, because Jesus said if you don't do more than that, you're not doing anything anyway. So, this whole idea of legalistic tithing has never been enough. It's always supposed to be more. And if you want to count, and I did this years ago when I was in Rockdale, I sat down and calculated how many tithes did those people have to give. Wasn't one. By the time you added it up, they gave more than 40% of their whole income every year to God and all the tithes and offerings they were giving. And that wasn't free will offerings. So, if somebody wants to get legalistic with you, tell them to study Exodus, Leviticus, and all that, and you'll have to give 40+% of everything back instead of 10. Then you're starting to get there. And you have to do it with the right attitude. That's the other problem. Yeah. You follow what I'm saying? So anyway, and then it talks about the battle between them. And then chapter 13, I'm jumping on this so you can get the overview here. And now we see the war on earth. And I saw a beast rising out of a what? The sea. Now the next one down there in verse 11 is out of the earth. Why is it doing this? It's doing a couple of reasons. It's showing you it's coming from two different things. And by the way, everything is made up of land and sea, right? So it's just showing this is a worldly or total thing. And this first one's coming out of the sea. And by the way, the word sea here, there's a session or two that Vandalon does. If you ever get a chance to show you some of them. Vandalon's this archaeologist. He went over to Israel. He does this whole series that focuses on the family and stuff. But one of the sessions he talks about ancient Hebrews. I already do this, but I'm just saying he does it on that show. If you ever noticed, did you ever notice that ancient Israel never had a navy? Even Solomon rented out boats. You know why? They saw the sea, the ocean, as chaos. They got that from Genesis 1 and 2. Because of the wording there, but for sea and stuff, it's the same base root word, okay? And if you notice, Jews by nature are not sailors. They're afraid, they don't like the water. Because in their culture, that's a negative thing, chaos. And so what did the fall bring into our world? Chaos. Secondly, in Revelation here specifically, you'll notice at the end of Revelation, and if you notice back toward the beginning there in chapters 4 and 5, it says when it's talking about there was a sea between glass, between the others and God. You get to the end, there is no sea no more. Why? It means there's no separation anymore. You see, in the Jewish culture, their heritage, sea is a chaotic mess. You don't want to be a part of it. It's evil. And so, because we all know what chaos is, right? It's when things aren't right. So, when God redeems everything, everything's working right again. So there's no more sea, no more chaos. There's no more negative. And there's nothing separating us from God. Follow? I'm trying to get you, because a lot of people are not aware of that image he comes out of the sea. It also represents, by the way, myriads of people. You'll see that a little later when it talks about Babylon is floating on all these people. Anyway, but notice this beast. What does he have? 10 horns and 7 heads. Does that sound familiar to you? Recognize anybody else that had similar type markings? Just a little while ago. Come on, don't
The
let
devil?
me- There you go. Satan, the serpent. You see? So what's it saying? Who's behind this beast? It's going to tell you that. The serpent.
Mhm.
This is one of his tools on earth to fight us. Follow? Now, that's what he's giving you here. And with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its head. Now, blasphemous names is also a reference to what? It's not a god. Right? So this beast is not a god. That's what it's telling you. It said what? And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet like a bear's, its mouth like a lion. That's similar to what Daniel told us in the Old Testament of this kind of stuff. And it is the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. In other words, this is a puppet for who? The dragon. The devil. Satan. Now, who is this creature? This beast. He is what? Figure it out. What do you think?
Antichrist.
So it's on.
Antichrist.
It's, well, no. You got a single person there. This is not a single person. This is a big beast, not a single person. That's where some people get it wrong. Now, the Antichrist would be a part of this, okay? He would head up this, but he would not be. It's government. Human government. And think about it. Who has given us more fits than anything over the years? 2 groups. And that's what these 2 beasts are. Government. Anybody here think government's your friend? Do you think first century Christians thought the Roman government was their friend? You follow what I'm saying? It's been that way throughout history. Satan works through. Our founding fathers were not all Christians, but they had a good basic faith. Some of them were committed Christians. But what's the government done? It's turned its back on that. And now the German people basically were pretty good people until some people got into power. Not just one, but we think of Hitler, but there have been multiple times in their history. I mean, you can pick any culture you want. But government becomes bad. And it usually focuses in on Jews and Christians in history, right? Who are the people of God. Who's behind all this? Satan. He's trying to get to us, right? So that's what it's trying to describe for you here, the battle that we have going on from government. And it also plays on a common myth of the first century here that was put forth by the Roman government, by the way. If you remember, Julius Caesar was this big honcho. He died, got stabbed. You remember? Shakespeare made a play out of it and all that. But after him, there was his adopted son, Augustus. That was his throne name, by the way, not his real name. He wasn't born Augustus, anyway. But many people thought because the whole world at that time was looking for a Savior. God had primed the pump. So they were looking for a Savior. Not just Jews, everybody was. Because things were in chaos, right? Well, Augustus comes along, he brings what they call the Pax Romana. That's Latin for the Roman peace. And he proclaimed himself, and others thought, he was the promised Messiah. He was bringing peace to the world. Okay? And so they begin to buy into that. And so then they begin to declare if you don't remember historically, Caesars began to declare themselves as gods. And they had a place where they were worshipped as gods, right? Nero comes along, and he plays off of that. And of course, he died, but there was a rumor that he hadn't really died, and he'd gone off in the distance. He was coming back, a second coming of the Messiah. That sound familiar? That's a false. Satan always falsifies the truth, you see. And so the people were looking for Nero, and that comes into play with a lot of different things. Some of your writings in the New Testament here too as well. And that's what this references to. But the government was the idea that it was the Messiah. It was the God. It was the end. How many people today believe the government is the answer to everything? A bunch. Why do you think we're moving towards socialism and communism the idea that government is the answer to everything. It's the answer to nothing, but you know, I still like, what was his name? Will Rogers, yeah, and some of you may not remember, but he was a famous, from Oklahoma, was a famous humorist. He always said the two worst things you could ever have someone say to you is, hello, my name is Joe Blow, I'm from the government, and I'm here to help you. And when has the government ever really fixed anything? Nothing. They patch it, they push it along. Now I'm not talking about public different, I'm not about parties, I'm talking about government. Anywhere you ever pick it. I traveled around the world, you know, my daughters and all those, we've traveled a lot. The average person out there in the world is pretty nice. They're just trying to make it like us. Every day they get up, they try to feed their families and make it another day. Who causes all the havoc in the world? Government leaders. Right? Think about it. What causes wars? It's not the average Joe Blow. They're the ones sent to war. In fact, most of the time the head honchos stay back, send other people, right? But who causes all this stuff? It's the government. Different forms. They use military, they use economics, they use different things. And I'm just saying that because we see all that. We live long enough, you get to see all this. What caused the Civil War? Was it the average Joe? No. It was the government positions and extremists that people took on stuff. What caused the Revolutionary War? King George and his extremism. You follow what I'm saying? Take any culture anywhere in the world throughout history. Government is a problem. Okay? Now God ordained it to be an institution, but it had to follow certain set things. In fact, if you were to go back and read Deuteronomy, it says when, and this is interesting because, you know, God didn't give them a king to start with. Remember, he gave his people what? Himself. There was a theocracy. But later on, what happened? He tells them in Deuteronomy before it ever happens, hundreds of years, when you ask for a king, go back and read it in Deuteronomy. This is what your king is to do. Now he warns you, you're not going to like it. And of course Solomon is the fulfillment. But he also gave them rules. He said that king of yours is to make a hand copy. In fact, they didn't have printing presses. Of what? The Torah, the law. And he was supposed to read it every day. So he would be a good king. Did he undo it? No, of course not. That's just like how many of these guys now, I mean, you see them go to Washington with good intentions and they come back very different. And I've never seen one come back poor. Have you? No. Now, I'm just saying, but they're probably go with good intentions. And some of them come back and they have most of their good intentions, they just weren't very successful. You know, because it's hard to go against the flow. But anyway, this is what's being portrayed here to us, is this government. And notice what it says in verse 5. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, is allowed to exercise authority according to, and again, this is another way of saying that same period of time. It opens his mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, and those who dwell in heaven. Does that sound familiar? Know any governments that do that? Yeah. Now, in the first century they had it. We have it today. Okay, it's every generation. And it was also allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and nation and language and nation. And all who dwell on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation on the book of life and the Lamb was slain. And he says, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to take him captive, to captive he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the what? The endurance and faith of the saints. Our job is to endure and be faithful to the end. Now, it turns around and jumps and gives you the second way Satan deals with it. Verse 11. Then, saw another beast. This one's not coming out of the sea, it's coming out of the earth. That's to show you it's a different beast. And it has two horns and a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. So, this you're going to follow along is not government, but what? Come on, think it. Starts with an R. Yes! Think about all the wars and all of history. I'm a history major. Government and religion are the two things that are consistent from all of the time eternity. We have written history about of causes of all this stuff. That's how Satan works. Now, aren't you glad we don't have any religious differences today? We don't have anybody beheading anybody on the beaches over in the Middle East. We don't have anybody shooting each other because they're Jew or because, You know, it's amazing. I spent a month over there in Israel, you know, and there's more than one sect of Jews over there. And 70-some% of them, by the way, are claim the atheists. They don't practice at all. But the ones that do are very dramatic. There's about 5 different strong groups of them. But they won't talk to each other. They get on a bus together. They won't sit with me. They won't look at each other. Now, aren't you glad there aren't denominations like that? Or churches like that? You know? Well, you don't do it just like we do. You know, you're going to hell. It sounds like Church of Christ. Are they the only ones supposed to be? You know, they don't joke about that, don't you? Is, you know, this guy dies, he goes, it's not good theology. Anyway, the guy goes to heaven, and St. Peter's showing him around, and he's showing him all the beautiful stuff and everything. Over there's this glass dome all by itself. He says, well, what's that on? Shh, that's the Church of Christ. I think they're the only ones up here. You know, religion. That's what this next beast is. That's why he has only 2 horns. Like a what? 2 horns like a lamb. You know, there's a false Messiah. Do we have any false messiahs? Have we ever had any false messiahs? You know? And that includes popes and Baptist preachers, by the way. I'm reading all the time about these idiots that are in pulpits nowadays, you know? That one guy, he's not Baptist, but a kid, whatever his name is, he got thrown out of his church for all misappropriation. He starts a second church. Now he's got out of that, and he's thinking he's going to start a third. People just keep, you know. Anyway, so you get the idea here. And it exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and its inhabitants do what? Worship the first, which is what? Government. What do the Nazis do in Germany?
Yep.
They formed their own church. What does the Chinese do over there? They have their own Chinese state church. You follow what I'm saying? And then this is just different ways of doing it. And makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. And again, that's a reference to that Nero thing, but it's the idea that, you know, somehow it's going to come back. No, only Jesus comes back. You know, that's the deal. But that's what they're pushing. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. In other words, you got all kinds of stuff. And we got all kinds of religious stuff like that. You can find just varieties of them. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Aren't you glad we don't have a government religion that does those things today? Well, that's what it's talking about. And that's not just first century or 21st. It's every. There's all these generations of this. And then it gets in, it also caused all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead. Now again, you go back to Deuteronomy, and Lord God, love the Lord your God, Lord your heart, mind, soul. And later on in Deuteronomy 6, it says, and tie these on your forehead and on your wrist, which is talking about on your mind and on your actions. But what do the Jews do? They made the same as everybody else. They have these things called phylacteries that they wear all the time, which are little leather boxes with straps. They tie them around their head with little portions of scripture in them and on your wrist, because they missed the point. Aren't you glad nobody misses the point today of what this is talking about? In other words, when your thoughts and your actions are not right, there's a consequence for that. That's what it's talking about. People are trying to get it into, well, you're going to get branded in 666 on your forehead. No, it's your mind he's talking about. You may have a 666 on there, but that ain't the problem. The problem is your expiration date. No. That's the joke. Anyway, all right. And it says no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of the name. Now, it gets into this. Let me just close with this. This calls for wisdom. What kind of wisdom? Divine wisdom. Okay? Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. Whereas the number of a man, not God, a man, and his number is 666. You got to understand, in that culture, in that day, Miss Mathematician, they did not have the ability to do what we have today. And they in either the language or the numbers. And so when they wanted to emphasize something, for example, in the Old Testament, they had no way of saying holy, holy, or holiest. That's why in Isaiah it says holy, holy, holy. Or in other places, holy, holy, holy. In the Hebrew language, that's how you emphasize. It was holy, holier and holiest, but it was holy, holy, holy. Numbers the same way. What is the number of man? It's short of God. What's God? 7. What's man? Always comes up short. No matter how many times you try. 6, 6, 6. It'll be 6. It's like pi. It goes on forever. Okay? Right? Pi goes on forever. That's what this is talking about. Don't let people drag you over on this other junk. Okay? The bottom line is just that. Okay? So, can you kind of see there what the 2 dimensions of the theater of war are and what's going on with that overview? Does that help any to see that how that fits together? Now who the characters are, that's your program. Can't tell the players without a program, but there's the program. Okay? So we're going to continue through all this thing, but can you see where it's going and how it fits? How God, we're in a war. Paul talks about it in Ephesians 6, doesn't he? What does he say you can do? It's a spiritual war. You put on your stuff, right? And that's what this is referring to, the same time. Any questions? Did y'all learn anything?
I wrote it down.
Okay. Okay. Make me feel better.
I'll give her
Good. You know I'm wasting my time.
No.
I've got like 5 pages of that.
I want you to know something. I have great hope for everybody, including myself. You know why? Because even God can work through a jackass called David. That's always been my hope. 2 things I have is that. Secondly, Corinthian letters, the Corinthian church. All that stuff, if you ever read it, it's horrible. Never once did Paul say not. That drives me nuts, but that gives me hope. So, you understand? So I just find that's 2 things. Think about this sometimes. Never once did say they're not Christians. Those are the most messed up people. Now, today they might not be so bad. They might be a normal church. But anyway.
He calls them saints in
Yeah,
that letter.
that's what I'm talking about. He never once said they're not.
I learned one very important thing tonight is that you were able to obey Judy throughout the
I
whole
know.
thing, and you did not.
It was hard.
We got you on video, so
Well, okay.
so you can show that to her.
Okay. I'm glad of that anyway. I got something out of it. Okay. Any final questions, thoughts? Or questions? I guess I'll close. Father, thank you for all you do. Thank you for this time. Be with us. We continue to pray for each person you mentioned here tonight. Each of us has family members, friends, co-workers, neighbors, someone that we're concerned about. Every day, we're in the midst of a battle, a war. And we have all this coming at us. It comes from government, religion. It comes in the world in which we live because everything is broken and out of sync and not following the Creator's design. And that includes us. And Lord, help us to get in tune with you and draw closer to you and stay close to you. Allow you to take us where we need to go because you promised that. If we will do that, endure with faithfulness to the end. You've made your promise that you're going to keep your end. I count on you. Thank you for this time, these folks. Be with us Sunday. We come back together. Be with us between now and then. Give us everyday opportunities